In 1818, Mary Shelley published her novel titled Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus, which she began writing when she was only 18. The book has since become a classic and is considered by many to be the work that gave birth to the science fiction genre. Yet, when we hear the name Frankenstein, most of us picture a bolt-necked monster groaning through a Gothic castle. Or maybe we think about the dangers of scientists trying to become gods. Or probably this scene.
It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.
But Shelley's novel tells a far more complex story, one that remains relevant over 200 years later. It's a story about what happens when brilliant people pursue knowledge without community, without accountability, and without love. In this video, I want to argue that Frankenstein isn't simply a cautionary tale against scientific progress. Instead, it's a story about irresponsible science, on what happens when ambition operates in isolation. I'll also examine how Yorgos Lanthimos' 2023 film, Poor Things, reimagines this myth, offering what Mary Shelley perhaps couldn't, a vision of creation that leads to liberation rather than destruction. Part 1. Frankenstein in Context. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein at a pivotal moment in Western intellectual history, as Europe stood between two worldviews. The Enlightenment had promised liberation through reason. Universal principles would sweep away superstition, and scientific method would unite humanity through shared truths. But by the turn of the 19th century, thinkers began asking, what happens to the things reason cannot grasp? What becomes of imagination when only analysis counts as knowledge? What happens to nature when it becomes a mere mechanism to be measured and controlled? This questioning gave rise to Romanticism, which sought to recover what Enlightenment had neglected: feeling, imagination, and communion with nature. Shelley absorbed both worldviews. Surrounded by romantic poets like Lord Byron and her husband Percy, but also engaged with contemporary scientists like Humphrey Davy. The result is a novel that doesn't simply reject Enlightenment science, but interrogates its practice. Part 2. Victor Frankenstein as a case study of irresponsible science. In the original novel, Victor Frankenstein isn't portrayed as evil or even misguided in his initial curiosity. His childhood love of natural philosophy is genuine, and his desire to conquer death stems from watching his mother die. Victor embodies both Enlightenment ambition and romantic passion. He is in awe of nature when he's young, and even finds great consolation in it after his brother's death. But he is also fascinated with the idea of controlling it, or, in his words, pursue nature to her hiding places. Yet, the book doesn't necessarily choose one approach over another. The problem isn't Victor's ambition, it's how he pursues it. During his experiment, he isolates himself completely, cutting off all contact with his loving family and his beloved Elizabeth. He works secretly in his apartment, sharing his methods with no one. And, most crucially, he gives no thought to what will happen after he succeeds. The moment his creature opens its eyes, Victor flees in horror and shame, abandoning a conscious being to fend for itself in a hostile world. Author Anne King Miller addresses this in her book, Mary Shelley, Her Life, Her Fiction, Her Monsters. She argues that Shelley deliberately contrasts Victor with the Enlightenment ideal of a scientist working happily within his community. Victor is the opposite, a man working in feverish isolation, cut off physically and emotionally from everyone who cares about him. As Miller puts it, detached from a respect for nature and from a strong sense of moral responsibility for the products of one's research, purely objective thought and scientific experimentation can and do produce monsters. Here's what I find most compelling about Shelley's vision. The novel doesn't condemn scientific inquiry itself. It condemns unchecked inquiry, science pursued without community, without ethical consideration, and without accountability. Victor's real failure isn't creating life, it's abandoning it. Had he stayed, had he taught the creature, had he introduced it to society gradually, the tragedy might have been averted. The creature itself makes this argument eloquently. It was born innocent, capable of love and wonder and curiosity, corrupted only by universal rejection. Victor's failure was not understanding that giving life requires more than assembling a body. It demands emotional and physiological labor. Creation demands ongoing care. Part 3. Poor Things, a Reimagination. Now let's turn to Poor Things, Yorgos Lanthimos' 2023 film adaptation of Alasdair Gray's novel by the same name. The film tells the story of Bella Baxter, a woman reanimated by a surgeon named Godwin Baxter, God for short, who replaces her adult brain with that of her unborn child. She is quite literally reborn. On the surface, this sounds like another Frankenstein story, and in some ways it is. Godwin, like Victor, initially keeps his creation isolated from the world. Bella is confined to his home, observed and documented, shielded from outside human contact. There's a possessiveness to his care, a desire to control what he has made. But the crucial difference lies in what happens next. Unlike Victor, Godwin doesn't abandon Bella the moment she becomes inconvenient or frightening. He educates her, teaches her how to speak, and cares for her nourishment and development. When she demands to see the world, he struggles with it, but ultimately lets her go. And when she returns, he welcomes her without judgment. Godwin, flawed as he is, provides the care that Victor failed to give his creature. If Frankenstein shows what happens when creation is followed by abandonment, Poor Things imagines what happens when creation is followed by care. Godwin is, after all, a doctor, and unlike Victor, he honors the physician's basic oath to do no harm. As Joanna Bacchio notes, in his hands, science can destroy, but it can also heal. The result is transformative. Bella, born without the shame and social conditioning that limit women in Victorian society, moves through the world with radical freedom. She explores her sexuality, develops her intellect, confronts injustice, and ultimately chooses to become a doctor herself, not to replicate her creator's power, but really to help others. As John Glendenning argues in his study of Gray's novel, the story advocates for morally committed science, science driven not by personal glory or institutional power, but by dedication to human welfare. The film also shifts perspective in a crucial way. Where Frankenstein is told primarily through Victor's point of view, Poor Things centers Bella's experience. By focusing on the point of view of the creation rather than the creator, the film grants her subjectivity and sympathy that Frankenstein's creature was denied. So, what do these texts tell us? For me, the message isn't that we should fear scientific progress, but that progress without responsibility can lead to tragedy. Victor Frankenstein's failure wasn't his ambition, it was his isolation, his secrecy, and, most importantly, his refusal to take responsibility for what he's made. Shelley doesn't condemn Victor for wanting knowledge, she condemns him for pursuing it alone, severed from community and ethical responsibility. The question our book asks is, What do we owe to what we create? These questions feel more urgent than ever in an age of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and technologies that promise to reshape what it means to be human. The Frankenstein myth endures because it reminds us that creation carries responsibility. Consider the parallel in today's AI industry. AI is a tool that we use on a daily basis and in almost every aspect of our lives now. Yet, we know very little about its inner mechanisms and how it really operates. Recent studies from Stanford and York universities have found that major AI companies are increasingly opaque about how they acquire data, how their models are used, and what risks they might pose. What we learn from Frankenstein is that technology itself isn't the danger, just as Victor's knowledge wasn't inherently destructive. The danger lies in the secrecy and the isolation from public accountability. Victor worked alone, cut off from community and ethical scrutiny. There's an echo of this in today's AI industry, where the most powerful companies often operate with the freedom that new technologies enjoy, but with a frightening lack of transparency. But it doesn't have to end in a tragedy. Poor Things offers something Shelley perhaps didn't imagine in 1818. A creation who is not destroyed but liberated, not abandoned but nurtured into full humanity. It's a hopeful revision, not naive, but one that insists that different outcome is possible. That creation, when paired with care and humanity, can lead to flourishing rather than catastrophe. And that, perhaps, is the conversation these texts invite us into. Not whether to create, but how to create responsibly, together, and with love.